Welcome, everybody, to Food for Thought, Nutrition and Health in Correctional Facilities, and even outside. I'm super excited about tonight, and you'll hear why in a little bit, but I was waiting all day to get on tonight to kind of share my thoughts and views, and also talk with some two just rock stars when it comes to advocacy work in the field and really getting a good understanding of what it's like to eat and sustain yourself inside of our prisons and jails in Pennsylvania and across the country. And we're going to be talking about all that. Before we do, my name is Jeff Abramowitz, and I'm super excited to be here. I'm the CEO of the Petey Greene Program. And for those that don't know, the Petey Greene Program is a national nonprofit that does educational tutoring inside and outside of our prisons and jails across the country. Our goal is to use college students and volunteers to help our students inside the walls get smarter so that they could transition home to their second mountain, the next journey that they're going to be on. And really excited to be here today. You're going to hear this a few times. You actually saw the link for it, but I want to start off by just saying, if you're getting fit and thinking about how you could take care of yourself, well, you need to think about doing our 5K run walk. So there was a link on before, but it's on April 13th, 2024. It's in Boston, Philadelphia, and also in Princeton. And we'd love to have you join us. It's really a fun day. A lot of just walking. You don't have to run. It's a good time to meet with people, to get together, and really community is what it's all about. So hope you'll join us. We'll talk more about it at the end of the webinar as well. So today we'll be talking about food and food for thought. And before I introduce our guests, which I know Leigh Owens is on, he's going to be talking to us from the Pennsylvania Prison Society. We also have Jonas Gillum, who's going to be on. Jonas, I think, hopefully will be on a little bit. But I have to start by telling you a little bit about myself and the journey so you can understand where I'm coming from. So I was a lawyer for 20 years, made some bad choices in life, ended up catching a federal indictment, and spent 5 years in a federal prison. And there was about a 4 or 5 year period when I was in between indictment and sentencing, when the government was trying to figure out what to do. And during that period of time, I couldn't work. I was a lawyer and wasn't able to practice. So I had done a few things. One was I contacted a friend of mine who was active in the Panera Bread system, and he said, "Jeff, we can help you, but you got to go back to culinary school and become a master baker." And so I did. I went back and learned how to bake and baked in Panera Bread and all their product for a whole bunch of stores, and became a manager. So it was crazy. But then after that, I took those skills and opened up an ice cream store and commercial bakery, which I sold before I went into prison. So food, for me and my family, is a passion. So going and transitioning inside of prison and seeing what actually happens to men and women inside as they try to live and survive is really was a remarkable experience for me, and one that challenged me from the very first day that I went into the system. But I need you to understand a few things before we really get into the discussion today, which is some of the facts. Before I get there, we do have somebody I want to introduce, because I've only met him a little while ago, but Leigh Owens, if you could unmute and just introduce yourself to the panel, to our wonderful group.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for that introduction. Again, my name is Leigh Owens. I currently serve as the Education and Advocacy Director for the Pennsylvania Prison Society. We are based out of Philadelphia, but our work stretches across the Commonwealth. I got into this work, I guess you could call it, because I've only been with the Prison Society for about 2 months. Prior to that, I founded a nonprofit called the Penn Franchise Project, where we working to secure voting rights for incarcerated people in county jails. But I got into this work as an impacted person myself, having spent about a year on Rikers Island about 20 years ago. About a little over 20 years ago, I was a college student at the time at Drexel University, majoring in film and video production. I was supposed to be a filmmaker. And unfortunately made some bad decisions, as Jeffrey said. We definitely have that in common. And ended up having to serve some time, and ended up having to drop out of Drexel and spend a year on Rikers in New York. And so that certainly changed the trajectory of my career. Obviously, there was a long period of time where I didn't think I'd have a career, given that, back then you still had to check the box, you still had to, show that you know, had been incarcerated, which really eliminated you from a lot of employment opportunities. And having that felony conviction certainly, had a bunch of, stipulations associated with it as well. But what I found was that, advocacy work, political work was an area that I could have an impact in, and simultaneously, still have a career by helping folks, in a similar predicament than myself, and trying to sort of attack mass incarceration and prison conditions, criminal justice reform, uh, from varying different angles, right? And so now we're doing it from an advocacy space with the Pennsylvania Prison Society, and very excited about all of the work that has to be done. And make no mistake about it, there is a lot of work to be done. So thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we're digging in. So one of my favorite organizations across the country is the Pennsylvania Prison Society for the great work they do. We're going to talk more about their work and as we go on tonight. But one of the things I want to encourage everyone is I know there's only two of us on screen, hopefully one more. But if you have questions, pop them in the chat box. And we'd love to hear from you. We want to hear your thoughts. You're going to hear a lot of stories, some that are going to tug at you, some that you're going to say, no way. And others are going to say, oh my God, I can't believe that. But if you have any questions at all, just throw them in the chat box and we're going to get right to them. They're on my screen. Sarah's on, and a big shout out to Sarah Hirschhorn, who kind of got this all together for us. And Sarah will be guiding the questions and make sure I don't miss anything as well. So let's set the stage. We're talking about food and food insecurity and what happens inside. So there's some great studies out, but one that that just knocked me off my seat was a study that was done about eating behind bars. It's called Ending the Hidden Punishment of Food in Prison. And it was a justice impact study that was done. And some of the data that came from this is kind of remarkable. It started off by talking really about asking the question during your incarceration, did you have access to fresh vegetables? And 62% of those people that were questioned inside said they rarely or never had fresh vegetables. 62%. 26% said sometimes, 11% said always. They were asked, a follow-up to that was, did you have access to fresh fruit? And 54.8% said they rarely or never had fresh fruit. 23% said sometimes, 15% said always. The reality is that the consequences of poor nutrition are clear, documented, and really undisputable. The research shows that just 1 month of unhealthy eating can result in long-term health consequences like high cholesterol, body fat, increased heart conditions, and the list goes on, including diabetes and all these other things that come. Statistically, people who suffer from higher rates of diabetes and heart disease are the people that are incarcerated generally have a higher degree of heart disease and diabetes than the general public. And I once saw a statistics that said that if you're a black male and you leave prison, you're at 600% times greater chance of getting a foot amputated when you leave prison because of the consequences of diabetes. Poor health conditions also suppress your immune system. So imagine during COVID, what poor nutrition does to those people that are trying to keep their body healthy and also to avoid some of the contagious diseases that happen inside of our prisons and jails. So the other staggering numbers, which really set me kind of reeling, were the reality that 71% of people that were surveyed in this one particular study said that they had to do things that were against the rules to get access to more food. And I'll repeat that. 71% said they had to do things against the rules to access more food. I'm going to give you some stories on that. So trust me, it's more accurate than you'll ever believe. And 75% of those surveys stated that they had been served rotten or spoiled food during their time away. And to me, I'm not sure that this is even a cost issue. We're not talking about serving filet mignon. We're talking about serving some basic foods that people can survive off of. But generally, another survey had shown that we spend about $3 per day to feed an inmate inside a person inside our system. So and in one state, it's down to $1 a day. So it's not a money issue when we talk about feeding men and women that are incarcerated. It really is just a humanity issue, a human, how should how do people deserve to be fed during their time away? It's an amazing discussion for me in particular, because one, I had worked in the food industry and the culinary industry and very love food. And the first thing that happened when I went inside was I ate something the first week or two and that I was in and got gout. I know you can't believe it. I'm a 25-year-old, but getting gout at 25 year old is kind of crazy. But yeah, I got gout when I was inside, and gout is one of the most painful things you could have. I got it in my foot, and somebody told me that. Well, I think it was my daughter who Googled it for me, and I was trying to figure out what in the world would do it. And processed meats did it to me. So I actually, during my entire bid, I did not eat any meat at all while I was incarcerated. I didn't eat chicken. I lived off of canned, or there were bags where I was bags of tuna or mackerel and some pasta and whatever salad or I could possibly get my hands on. So nutrition for me was a struggle. I lost 48 pounds while I was away, and I struggled really to find nutrition. And I was working hard. I worked in Unicor every day in a manual labor job for most of my bid, and it was kind of difficult for me to keep physically like aware of my body and being able to just function every day. And that's why there's a lot of men and women inside that struggle with nutrition. And there's a few things we're going to talk about how you do survive in prison and what it's really like. But I'm curious, and I want to kick this off with Leigh because um I mean, I was in the federal system. Is this something that we see in our Pennsylvania Pennsylvania prison system? Is it something that's just a localized issue, or is this really something that's on a national scale?
No, I mean, certainly throughout Pennsylvania, correctional facilities, and that incorporates state facilities as well as county jails. This is an issue, a tremendously important issue across the board. Um, I can't speak to federal facilities in Pennsylvania, but you can, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Can speak to federal facilities, but certainly Pennsylvania facilities are dealing with this, and it's something that has been very, very high on the Pennsylvania Prison Society's radar, where the Prison Society actually did a report, a survey on the nutritional and nutrition slash food conditions inside the facilities. And a lot of the data that we were able to garner really reinforces, Jeffrey, everything you were saying about the data that you guys were able to garner as well. And we're talking here, specifically about Pennsylvania. And so, what we found, 62, I think it's about 62% of respondents, and this is regarding COVID era restrictions, that they want to return to eating in dining halls. And the reason for that is because hot meals are frequently served cold, which is a violation of Department of Correction food safety policy. About 70%, 73% of respondents to our survey reported receiving fewer hot meals than pre-COVID. 74% of our respondents reported being served rotten fruits and vegetables or other foods in the last month of the survey, and 72% reported smaller portions compared to before the pandemic. The minority of our respondents who said they prefer to have their meals delivered to their cell or housing unit, they overwhelmingly cited problems relating to how the Department of Corrections administers those meal times in the dining hall, rather than, sort of any sort of intrinsic benefits to meal delivery. So essentially, people prefer having their meals in the dining halls because if there's a problem, if it's rotten, if it's not cold, you can take it back and you can get another tray. But obviously, if you're having that meal delivered to you in a cell, you cannot do that. So that is just a really small tidbit of what we found. And a part of our job, right, is to monitor this and to work with the Department of Corrections, to come up with solutions to those problems. And sometimes those problems, those issues have to be dealt with on a legislative level, or in some cases, on a grassroots organizing level, or otherwise. So
Yeah. Leigh, let's set the stage for everybody because I think you have to understand the whole scope of what happens. So you're in a facility, and sometimes there could be hundreds or even over 1,000 men or women that we're serving in one time. And understand that the people that are actually cooking the food are people that are incarcerated. They're men and women that want to work in the kitchen. And there's a whole dynamic to that too that we should talk about, which is really that the men and women that work in the kitchen facilities are there sometimes because number one, they get access to food, so they can actually eat more than other people because they're working in that environment and they're able to they're around it, they're able to get a little bit better food, make some sandwiches or different things that they could have. And and it's also one of the higher paying jobs in most facilities, working in the kitchen. And it's also a place where it's relatively safe, but it's hard work. It's hard work. I remember I was working in the Philadelphia Detention Center, and it was my first job. When I got in, I was in maybe a week, and they threw me down to the kitchen, and I felt really bad because we were making at the Philadelphia Detention Center. They are it's it's a big unit. It's a big building, and you're actually traying everything and bringing them to the units. So on a hot meal, when you're in a line and you're putting stuff on trays, it could be sometimes an hour, hour and a half, 2, 3 hours before it gets up to where it's got to go to in the building because everything's got to go on an elevator and it's got to go through security and it's all checked. And there are a lot of times that the men that I was working with were going so fast that sometimes they would miss something on the food line or they would only give a smaller portion. It wasn't regulated that way. And I always felt bad because I was like, man, if that was me, like if I was eating off that tray, I'd be really mad. And same thing with like spoiled food and stuff. And I would do my best not to put it on or let a CO or somebody know that this was bad. But it's a really crazy system that happens in many institutions where they bring food sometimes from far away in order to get it into the dining hall or to the units. The dining hall is a different experience as well. And in the dining hall, a lot of times it's a whole different culture in there. And there's a lot of trading. I remember they used to sell hamburger day. They had hamburger day once a month or once every few months. And they used to sell their hamburgers for other commissary items like toothpaste or, whatever, shaving cream or whatever else they needed. And it was almost like it was a whole industry kind of inside the walls of how it worked. Can you talk a little bit about, I know you guys have done some work in this as an advocacy, but is the food really that different? I mean, food is food. If you're giving people, salad and salad bars, it's probably the same salad bar as everybody else, right? What's the different from the content end? What have you guys found?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main difference is it's a few things, right? I would say it's the quality of the food, right? Because we know all food is not, particularly fruits and vegetables and grains, whether it be bread, oats and things like that, are not necessarily created equal, which is evident in the fact that like, there are people that may go to Walmart for, a bike, but they're not going to buy their produce out of Walmart, right?
Mm.
And so it's a different way to think about it. Like I go to the produce junction, to get my produce, but that's because I know that the quality, and you can even taste the quality, the difference in the quality from, like, say, for example, Walmart, or even like Aldi and the fruits and vegetables at Whole Foods, right? So we know that all food is not created equal. So what we're part of what we're fighting against is a mentality and a notion that because you're incarcerated, you don't deserve anything but subpar conditions, right? And so because of that, you're gonna get the bottom of the barrel, in just about every aspect. And sometimes the bottom of the barrel, I guess in some circumstances, they've been sort of getting away with it for decades and decades, but we're seeing the results of it now, with so many, like Jeffrey, you were saying, in terms of the increase in heart disease and diabetes and those kinds of things that are, folks that are incarcerated are more likely to obtain, right? And so the nutritional aspect is like the biggest part of that. I mean, I had a friend that did about 30 years, has been home for about 5 or 6 years, and has been having some serious health problems and has been on social media just really talking about how the food and nutrition inside the facility played, according to his doctors, played a huge role in his current health turmoil. And so yeah, I mean, there's a huge difference between the food that we buy and the food that is inside the facilities. And that's also evident in the cost. When you look at the cost of it, Jeffrey, I think you mentioned that it was like $1 or something like that. And I know in Pennsylvania, it's around the same. It's maybe, $4 or $5 or something like that, something really, really low. I know for me, $5 isn't even enough for my morning latte, right? And so that's all you're spending. That's all it costs, and you certainly have to you have to wonder how good the quality can possibly be.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about quality for a second. So I was shocked when I was inside that the first time I sat down at a meal where I was, they served broccoli, and they served the stalk of the broccoli and not the top. And it was really evident that the stalks had been cut off as part of the manufacturing process somewhere, and instead of tossing them out or using them for whatever, they actually resold them to the prison. And it was the same thing with cake. We would see often that cake would be the ends of the cake, or the ends of a piece of bread, or loaf of bread, and that they would just repackage it and sell it to the prisons as opposed to throwing it out. And that was their way of kind of getting around it. How much have you seen in some of the work that you've done of the shortcuts, like those kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, all the time, all the time. And I wish our prison monitoring director, Noah, Garth, was on this call to talk more about that, because him and his team go into the facilities regularly and they report these kinds of things all of the time. And when you talk to the folks that are living in those facilities, the inmates, I mean, they share that sentiment, which is that, um, food is sometimes irregular, again, food is spoiled. When it comes to grains and oats, again, just very, very low quality, stale, molded, just anything you could think of. But again, I think part of what adds insult to injury is that when you get that tray, because it's being delivered to your cell, you can't send it back like you could if you were in the cafeteria, right? So you're essentially stuck with it. And so I think it really does like emphasize the problem even more post-pandemic when you add in the COVID era uh,
Look,
changes.
so raises a really good point, Lee, but I want to talk about, which is really what happened during the pandemic. Going into the food hall or going to an actual dining hall and eating is one thing, but actually having a box meal or a bag, it was actually paper bags is what we would get. And in our paper, and often would be this God's honest truth, gray baloney, things that, you couldn't figure out even what it was, because sometimes it was so spoiled or prepared so long ago that it wasn't, it was inedible. It just wasn't even edible. But how much of this has changed as a result of the pandemic? And are we seeing more facilities allowing people back into the dining halls, or is this something that is now part of the norm?
It certainly has become part of the norm. And there are other, I won't get into it, but there are other COVID era restrictions that have become the norm that are also problematic. Obviously the food delivery to the cells is on the, one of the top issues on that list. But there are others. But yes, I think what's happening is that, and this is me speculating. I can only speculate about what DOC's reasoning is for keeping things that way. But part of it is that I think that they believe that it's better. I can tell you for a fact, and you kind of touched on it, that in the cafeterias, a lot goes on, right? And so, like, if you have the cafeterias closed and you have a reason or an excuse to have them closed, then you don't have to worry about probably, other things like fights maybe, or like trading, or like people trying to smuggle food into their cells, because that happens a lot. And so, like, but it's also survival, right?
No, I don't understand. So yes, I completely agree. Like I saw more fights in our cafeteria, and it was just really easy for them just to shut the cafeteria down, just bag lunch everything, bag breakfast everything. It just is the easy way around it. But the truth is, I was in a facility today. They're suffering across the country with tremendous shortages of correctional officers, and this is a really simple out for everybody, isn't it? And just say, look. Let's just bag it. Let's just, deliver it to the units. We don't have to worry about opening transporting people. We don't have to worry about contraband. We don't have to worry about. I never really fully understood though, like what harm is it in taking an apple back to your unit? And then I did. Because for those that have been incarcerated that may be listening to us know, they called it hooch where I was, but there was a way of turning fruit into alcohol, and that was what they tried to kind of avoid. Although I didn't see much of it, but I did see some of it.
Same with
Yeah,
orange, with orange peels,
yeah. It's kind of so there are some master craftsmen inside of our prison system when it comes to food. And I would see a lot of things inside that were really, I mean, actually had some amazing food in there, but it wasn't food that came from the commissary. It was that came from the kitchen. It came from the commissary of guys making things. Can you talk a little bit and educate our audience a little bit about what happens? And, if you're not eating well, in the cafeteria and what's being served, what's the alternative? Where are you going?
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for that question, because it comes up so often. It's so prevalent because for a few reasons, right? I mean, the obvious ones that we stated, with the food delivery, food being cold, sometimes rotten, things like that. The portion sizes being smaller. And so, based on that, a lot of folks are having to make tough decisions, right? And a lot of folks, come into incarceration with bodily ailments, diseases and things like that. But folks also develop them while they're incarcerated during their time. And so when you have a situation where, again, the factors mentioned, but also the factors such as like the food times, right? So, a lot of times breakfast can be as early as like 4:30 a.m. Anywhere from like 4:30 a.m. to, 6:30, 7:30 a.m. if you're lucky. And then I think lunch in a lot of facilities is like around 9:30, from like 9:30 to 11:30, around that time. And then, dinner starts at 3:34. So you see the gaps there, and then dinner, and then there's the whole evening where you don't have anything. So you're gonna get hungry. You're gonna get hungry between dinner and the next, and the next day for breakfast, right? So, what are you gonna do? You have to buy commissary, right? And so, again, if you have a ailment, if you have a reason to see a doctor, then we've had reports of folks that have had to make tough decisions on whether or not to purchase commissary to supplement hunger, or use that money to go see the doctor, because you have to pay a $5 copay if you need to see a doctor. And by the way, I don't know if you guys know this. Obviously Jeffrey does, and some folks do, but prison wages are very low. You get paid cents per day, right? So you're not making a lot of money to put in your commissary. So hopefully, folks have family members that are putting money on their books so that they can get commissary.
Let's talk about that. So the truth is that most people to survive prison, you rely upon your commissary. And if you don't have a good job and you're not making any money, then you really don't have a lot to spend. And it comes down to families on the outside, and you become a burden on your family where you're calling, asking to put money on your books so you can buy whatever you need to survive. And I would find the things that kind of got me the longest and that often weren't healthy for me. If you guys ever have a chance, I want you to take a look at a packet of ramen noodles. Just those, they were like 50, 25 cents inside. And just take a look at a packet of ramen noodles and what it costs, and what the salt content is of that little packet. It's like four times your daily requirement of salt in there in one little packet. And the truth is that many people they live off of what they buy on commissary, and they're often commissary just doesn't have the healthiest of things. They don't usually have fruits and vegetables of any kind at all. They usually have prepackaged processed foods, Doritos. And it's not even just the quality of the food that you're getting and the nutritional value of it, it's the cost of it. There's a tremendous industry out there and we see it not just with food, but we see it with clothing that's sold in prisons, sneakers. We see it with tablets. We see it with music. We also see it mostly with phone calls. And there's companies out there that charge unbelievable amounts of money for people to communicate with their families. And it's the same thing with food and nutrition. It's often really hard to find adequate food or food that's of any nutritional value on the commissary itself. And it's a struggle for a lot of people that results in their family. And I always laugh because one of the things that people love most was visitation, and there was two reasons they loved it. Number one, they got to see their family, which is always a great thing. But the two was that they often got to be in the visiting room where there were vending machines, and those vending machines would pump out food that they could eat that they would never have a chance to eat, in years, of chocolate bars or things that the families were often allowed to share with them in the visiting room. And that's really the only way you actually got to see some of them. It's it's crazy when you think about the way commissary works, but the things that were available, man, guys could do some crazy good things with them. And I remember one of the things that was very common was a lot of my Latino friends would make mofongo, and they would make a Latin dish, and it was as good as any dish I've ever eaten on the outside. It was just a way they crafted it from things that they had around them, but also a lot of that stuff was just stolen. It's just you go to prison and you learn how to steal to survive, because that's how you get nourished, that's how you get food. And a lot of people, more people than you could imagine, got caught every day taking extra milk out of the commissary or out of the cafeteria, or taking a piece of fruit out or whatever it was. But yeah, there was a lot of that behind the scenes stuff going on. And I guess in a sense, Lee, it makes it a little easier for institutions too when they just deliver stuff. Like they know what you're getting. There's no chances of that contraband flowing out or any of that.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, there's a case to be made, I think, by the Department of Corrections for operating that way. And I mean, you brought up a great point about the phone calls and how expensive they are. There's a bill now being crafted by a legislator, I believe, in the Senate, that would make phone calls free, right? And it's something that we're looking into, possibly supporting. But those are the kinds of things that come up, with the prison society and with it just, any organization that's monitoring prisons, you'll see that like all those kinds of things they matter, they're important. And when you really look at it, if you look closely enough, they do have a relationship to us on the outside, as it relates to all sorts of things, but particularly public safety. So when prison conditions aren't optimal, and that's optimal for not just the folks living there, but even the staff, right? We all suffer on some level. Yeah.
There's a black market inside of most prisons for food, and that goes around. People are buying and selling, and oftentimes it is spoiled, and oftentimes they're forced because they don't get enough to really resort to crazy things in order to get some of the food. I know that where I was, they broke into the warden where we were had a separate freezer, and they broke in and bought a and stole a ham. And cut it up, and they were trying to cook it in the microwave oven in the unit, but they resorted to some crazy things. I want to talk religion for a second because we're talking about food. We just connected it to phone calls a little bit, but food plays a really important part in people's religious beliefs. I know I'm Jewish. I was inside and I celebrated Passover. And when I celebrated Passover, I was given certain food that to celebrate the holiday. What impact does food or the inadequacy of food play in what the work that you're doing to advocate for those people that are observing religious beliefs?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's a great segue into like the fact that we're currently in Ramadan, right?
Mm.
And there are millions and millions of Muslims that are celebrating that right now. Um, I've literally visited George Hill last week in Chester County, and one of the questions that we were asking folks, is because we're in Ramadan, and obviously you had to be Muslim to get that question, but like, are you able to get a tray after you break your fast because you're fasting all day? And the inmates said yes, they were able to, and that was something that we were very happy about. But what I have seen is that generally speaking, on a basic level, religious accommodations, at least for the major religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, those needs tend to get met. I've seen, haven't heard any reports on anything lacking in that area, so that's helpful.
I think you need to set the stage though for a little bit about your visits. So I don't know that people fully understand the duty of the Pennsylvania Prison Society, which is kind of remarkable because it is probably the only agency in the country that I'm aware of that is constitutionally tasked with doing what you do. Can you explain a little bit about the work you do at the Prison Society and what your mission is?
Yeah, I would love to. So for folks that don't know, the Prison Society was founded in 1787 by the founding fathers, right? So like, Ben Franklin, all those guys, like they created the Pennsylvania Prison Society with the understanding and the belief that just because you're incarcerated doesn't mean you should be completely separated from society where no one ever checks on you to make sure that you're okay. Right. So it was all started about monitoring what goes on in those facilities in the spirit of brotherly love, by the way, and neighborly love, neighborly affection. Essentially, it's us checking on our neighbors. Right. These folks are incarcerated, but they're still our neighbors, and they're going to come home at some point. Right. And so, the founding fathers understood that. They understood that because a person made a mistake and had to be separated from society for a period of time, that didn't automatically eliminate their humanity. And so that's what we try and do, right? It's a very interesting organization, and it's gone through different iterations over the decades, I'm sure. But in this current phase, a lot of the work is about three things. It's about keeping families connected, keeping families together, which benefits children of incarcerated parents, and benefits the folks that are incarcerated. It keeps them, in a better mentality, less infractions, less violence inside the facilities when you're connected to your family, better mentality when you come home, in a spirit of reentry, because we know that reentry goes a long way to prevent recidivism. So when you keep families together, you essentially do work to put a dent in recidivism, which is also public safety. And then it's about prison monitoring. It's about, we have a whole team of folks led by Noah Garth that go into the facilities all across the state, county jails and state correctional institutions. And they ask questions. They go in with a survey and they ask questions on the blocks. They go directly to the cells. They go to solitary confinement, right? And they ask questions. And because it's the prison society, they don't necessarily have Department of Corrections hovering over them, trying to, make sure that, certain questions don't get asked or whatever. I don't know. I'm not saying that there's a conspiracy out there. I'm just saying that the prison society has a unique access to these facilities that allows them to operate outside of the Department of Corrections in a way that helps us get real information from the folks that are incarcerated there.
That's
And so
awesome.
yeah. And so
No,
the
it's
last
great.
component
Good.
is real quick. The last component is the education and advocacy component, which is where I come in. And that is sort of the public facing aspect of the prison society where we, our prison monitors, our family support specialists, our helpline, they garner all of this information. And it's my job to get that information out to the necessary channels, whether it be the community, whether it be people like you, whether it be the politicians or the advocates, but getting that information out and ensuring that we're doing everything we can to address whatever issues arise from that information.
Well, on behalf of all of the constituents in the Commonwealth, thank you, because there really needs, especially from the justice perspective, we need to have people looking out and holding people accountable in the system. I was with a young man, it was several years ago. I was working at my prior agency and doing workforce development, and a young man came to me, just got home, and he said, "Yo, Mr. A, I need a job." I like, all right, what do you want to do? He said, man, I haven't done anything. I was, selling drugs when I was a little kid. I just got done a 10-year bid. I have nothing, man. I've never done anything. I was like, what'd you do inside? And he said, oh, I worked in the kitchen. And I said, "Well, tell me what you do." He said, "Well, I started in the kitchen. They put me in the pots and pan room and started there, and then worked my way up to a line server. And then from a line server, I became a chief steward. And then from a steward, I became head of my kitchen unit. And then went on talking." And I said, "Well, tell me something. Where did you do this?" He said, "Oh man, we had this great kitchen, like had all the newest equipment, had these walk-in boxes, had these, freezers and things that I learned at." And he went on for a good 15 minutes telling me about his culinary experience. And the first thing I said to him was, "Man, you got it." I said, "Did you like what you're doing?" He said, "Yeah, I loved it." And when I had that discussion with him, it finally hit him. And he'd been serving 1,200 meals 3 times a day in a commercial kitchen, and he was proficient at what he did. And if you put that in the real world, he had value, and he began to recognize his value of working in the food industry inside of the prison system itself. And there are other peoples that are on the outside. I just came back to last night from a conference in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was walking through the hotel and I bumped into a very good friend of mine. If you can check this out, his name is Jeff Henderson. He's Chef Jeff, and Chef Jeff has done some time away, and he was the chef at Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas, and he runs a program called New Direction, which is there's a part of his program, a cohort is in Trenton, New Jersey, where they have several cohorts a year that they run at the Rescue Mission of Trenton. But Jeff shares with young people that have gone through the system the value of working in the culinary field and culinary space. It impacted me when I was inside because one thing I noticed inside was that people weren't getting educated to what they were doing. And so I started a Serve Safe class inside. And Serve Safe is a certification you can use when you come home, and we got people certified inside. So eventually when they came home, they were able to work in a restaurant, and they were able to proudly show that certification, so that they could feel get a step up on other people working in the culinary field. There's a real career pathway, and I think we do a disservice by not taking advantage of it and really teaching men and women that are inside of the work that they do and the value of it, and how important it is to learn and to be engaged in the kitchen. Are you seeing, from an educational perspective, what are you seeing as far as people getting involved inside? Is it just one of these good jobs where you can eat a little bit more, or is it a position where they're really trying to attract talent that maybe wants to work in the culinary field?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say that, the Reentry Services Office is an office that we have really been trying to uh, pull information out of. And frankly, it's been unfortunate that we have not really seen, and this is talking to, folks that are incarcerated as well, that there isn't a lot of programming and activities happening. DOC, I believe, like they'll tell you, that there's all this great things happening with reentry and with programming, things like that. But when you talk to the folks that are living there, that message does not translate. We don't get the same message, right? And so it's about really trying to figure out how to get the truth, and how to really understand and figure out what is really happening. And sometimes you can't even grasp that or wrap your head around that as a prison monitor. You can't always get that as far as programming goes, right? So it's a mixed bag. I mean, I remember in Philly we had the Office of Reentry Services, that was supposed to be sort of the bridge between the facilities and the outside, and it's just not enough happening. It's not enough going on in those areas. If I can be critical right now, um, but the reality is that these kinds of services, these kinds of programs, are what makes the difference between rehabilitation and strictly, I guess you could call it punishment. And that's more of what we're getting right now, is punishment and not rehabilitation.
So does this come down to the way we actually, the culture, the way we look at our prison society and our
Yeah.
prison, the whole mass incarceration syndrome, you know, do you think, and I'm just thinking of this now, but do you think that if we fed people a little bit better, like if we just treated them with more dignity and respect, and if it was, and we really looked at incarceration in a holistic way, like really thinking about how can we get them better, feeling better about themselves mentally and physically, and give them some skills and education. If we looked at it at a holistic level, would we be in the position that we're in? Ironically, I just looked at some data this morning that showed that for the first time in 10 years, our prison population has increased in the United States.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Are we looking at this wrong? Should we really be looking at the big picture and all this?
Well, yeah, we are. And I think part of it too is that we didn't get it right the first time, right? Because if we had got it right the first time, the prison population wouldn't be where it is. There
Mhm.
would be no need for so much incarceration. But we didn't get it right the first time. We didn't get it right with education, public education. We didn't get it right with so many things that have led to mass incarceration. And that's also like the over policing of Black and brown communities, right? Over policed, right? That also speaks to the infiltration and the widespread availability of drugs, in many neighborhood, in many urban environments. And now we're seeing with the opiate epidemic that it's across the board, not just in communities of color. We're seeing drug epidemics in a lot of different diverse areas, and particularly in Philly. So we didn't get it right the first time. So what we're doing is like we're creating this like revolving door of recidivism, and not just recidivism with people that have been incarcerated, but recidivism of people that have grown up with people that were incarcerated or addicted to drugs, because now they're the ones committing the crimes and doing the time. And
Well,
so
mhm.
yeah, no. So we didn't get it right either time. So we're not creating a situation where, because we got it wrong the first time, now they're here. Now they're a ward of the state. So we're not saying, all right, they're in this situation. Let's figure out how to make it so that when this person goes home, they don't come back here.
Well, we know that 1 in 3 black males are going to find their way inside of a prison cell during their lifetime, and a lot of our minorities, our marginalized populations, come from communities where they're food deserts, where they never really learned good nutrition, and the fact that we're not doing it inside and not helping them get that understanding of, well, if you eat a little bit better, it can result in this, this, and this, and where it goes. So we got all this data. We know just common sense tells us what it where this drives. It drives to a healthier person, a healthier environment. But as an advocate, how do you make that case? One of the things that I often hear is, well, you're incarcerated, you're in jail. What did you expect? Like, what did you expect? Did you want us to give you a good meal every day? We'll give you the McDonald's or Wendy's or fast food, whatever it is. How do you change that mentality? How do you change the culture, the way we think about food inside of our prisons and jails?
Yeah, no, it absolutely goes back to something we were talking about earlier, which is that there is this notion, as you just said it, that dictates, because you're incarcerated, because you made a mistake, you don't deserve anything good. You don't, it's all related to punitive measures and punishment and all of those things, all those factors, and you know, you, you've been incarcerated, so you see sometimes the dialogues that go on between the correctional officers and the folks that are incarcerated. And sometimes they get talked to really, really bad. They get treated like animals, they get shuffled around and spoken to in ways where like, there are people that treat their dogs better than the way folks get treated in these facilities sometimes. So it is part of the culture. It manifests itself in all of the areas: food, manifests itself in discipline, and again, the relationship between the officers, the staff, and the folks that are incarcerated. So, I mean, I think we have to change the narrative. We have to change the way people view people that are incarcerated. And we also have to consider that we have a very flawed criminal justice system, that everybody that's incarcerated isn't even guilty. Right. And so we also have to consider that. And again, it's not Disneyland. We've recognized that. We've recognized that there are people that should probably be separated from society. But we also have to remember that we're incarcerating a lot of drug addicts. We're incarcerating a lot of people solely for drugs, right? The majority of the population in these facilities are not heinous crimes. They're not murderers and rapists, right? I mean, they're there, but the majority of it is not are not those kind of things. The majority of it are people that are trying to survive, right? And just going about it the wrong way. So you have to take all those things into consideration. We have to take into consideration the systemic issues that have gotten us to where we are, and understanding why we're not saying that these folks deserve again Disneyland, but we also have to understand that everybody's deserving of a second chance, and that when we negate that, we deny humanity's basic capacity to change, right, and to be a different person. So we can't deny people second chances, and we can't treat people as less than human because they're incarcerated, because they actually are still human beings.
Yeah, Leigh. So Leigh, I want to remind our audience too, throw if you have a question or something strikes you, please feel free to throw it in the chat box. I'm curious about something that we haven't really talked about, which I'm actually getting a little teary about, but is food for me was a trauma inside. I love food. I love food before I went inside. I love food now. I love the variety of food. I love everything about it because I think it's an experience. I think when you dine with someone, and I believe that the best way of learning about someone is when you break bread with them. Like, so anyone that I want to do business with as a partner or invite him as part of our program, I always say, meet me for a cup of coffee, meet me for lunch, meet me for dinner, because it's an experience. It's where you get to see an interaction and get to know people. And there's something about food that just kind of brings you into the space where inside a prison, I had a hard time. I struggled with the concept of food. There were more meals that I did not go to than I went to. And that was because I had a hard time walking into the cafeteria. Number one, because I always felt that it was a place I didn't feel 100% safe. I just didn't feel safe there. I thought that there was always a notion. I remember my first week that I was incarcerated. It was my first day. I walked into the cafeteria and I didn't know where to sit. And I sat down in somebody's seat and at a table. It was just there are picnic tables inside, or cafeteria tables, and sat down at somebody's seat. And and as soon as I sat down, I knew it was not going to be good. There was a few guys at the table looked at me, and then the guy who normally sits there, that was it. And but for two guys in the unit that came over and pulled me, that knew me, they pulled me away and said, "No, you're sitting here with us." And they were two, I call them OGs, the old guys in the unit, and they said, "No, man, this is your seat. You're sitting with us from now on." But for that, bad things would have probably happened. But inside the cafeteria, it just wasn't a good place for me, and I needed to kind of stay out of it. And that meant I had to rely on food outside of it. I was wondering if you think that there's any that the trauma of food and incarceration, if there's a connection between between what happens inside, and we're going to talk a little bit about what happens on the outside in a minute, but um, what do you think about it? Is there a trauma that people deal with as part of all of this?
Yeah, no, you said it best because, like I was saying, I visited a facility last week and I had visited Rikers post my incarceration for speaking engagements, but in the never in the part of the facility where people sleep, with common areas, the dorms or the cell blocks. So this was my first time in a cell block since my incarceration, and it was triggering for me. Because during my incarceration, it was the part where I didn't feel safe. So being there again last week, and I've been home for over 20 years, but
Wow.
it brought everything back to me, and it felt like a weight that was just like put back on me. And it was very, very interesting to feel that way again. And I felt safe last week, obviously, but it reminded me of how I felt while I was incarcerated on Rikers Island. And I remember not feeling safe, not just because of the other folks that were incarcerated, but I felt less safe because of the COs. Like I always felt like if something was going to happen to me, it would be from a CO. Um, so everybody has a different experience, but certainly, that trauma will follow you in many different iterations, many different aspects. And, you have to, as a formerly incarcerated person, and many of us will say the same thing, like you have to actively and viciously seek healing. And for whatever that means for you, but you have to seek it.
So it's interesting. We're talking about trauma and, going through. We recently had we opened and launched the Puck Camera Center for Educational Justice and Equity. And we had people on from around the world that were talking about the way other countries do it, and one of the things that I can say I've seen happen is at SCI Chester in Pennsylvania, that they have a Scandinavian village, a village where, men and women are preparing, or men are preparing to take the next step out, and are actually, they cook their own meals there. They're given the equipment to cook their own meals. And I'm wondering, wouldn't that really be a better alternative? Like where, they're deciding, they're giving them the supplies to make what they're comfortable with, where and they're actually preparing themselves for leaving and exiting the facility. And I know maybe it's just a dream, but in some facilities around the country, you cook for yourself. You're given an allotment of food. That's what you eat, and you can make what you want, how you want it, and you're not forced to kind of rely upon just what's being tossed at you.
That's right. It's a great point about the Scandinavian bloc because Department of Corrections secretary, out of their own mouth, said how great um, the facility is, and not just touting it from the DOC perspective, but touting it to the extent that like there are less infractions, there's less violence, there's less everything negative that you can think of when it comes to negative prison conditions. There's less of all of it. So the question arises like, why wouldn't you try and implement this across the board, right? And so I think money's the issue, but again, it goes back to a lot of things. Like, unfortunately, like we live in a society where it does take money to solve problems. It's going to take money to solve the conditions inside these facilities. It's going to take money to fix the systemic issues on the outside that lead to incarceration. It's just going to take money to do a lot of these things. And it's not because people that are incarcerated are a strain on the system. It's not that. It's not that at all. It's that, there are a lot of factors, particularly in Black and Brown communities, that are, and I hate to even say this, but they're stacked up against these populations to almost shuffle them into the criminal justice system. I mean, the reality is that law enforcement in prisons, these things were started in large part as a response to the transatlantic slave trade and keeping African people and African American people in certain neighborhoods, or keeping them incarcerated as a second iteration of slavery itself. I mean, the 13th Amendment says it, slavery is over except if you commit a crime, right? And so it's no secret why the majority of the prison population is Black and Brown people. And there was a time where if you went particularly in the deep South, but in Pennsylvania too, you could get incarcerated for almost anything for things that only certain people would do, like standing on a corner, or loitering, or public drunkenness, or just things that laws that we have in place today that were specifically designed to incarcerate Black people because they were the only ones being cited for it. They were the only ones being policed. And right now it's like, everybody does drugs. Every community does drugs. Every community is violent and on some level. Obviously in Philly, we have a specific issue going on right now, a big problem. But when you're a community that's being over policed, then you're going to make up the majority of the prison population. So uh,
I'm curious a little bit about what happens next. So, like, how can we really change society when it comes to this issue in particular? What is it that our listeners can do? What is it we can do as advocates? Like, how do we pitch this? How do we sell this to somebody that can make change? It's a hard sell when you go in and you're saying, what is it that we should be saying? What are the bells that we should be hitting on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a few things that stand out to me. And first and foremost, I think that being politically engaged, and whether that's with the electorate or politically engaged, as in advocacy work and things like that, where you're paying attention to what's going on and you're connected to your local legislators, your council members, your state representatives. And even in some counties and some places, like your prison administrators and your county commissioners, like having relationships and knowing who those people are. Almost everyone knows someone that either is or has been incarcerated, right? Check in on that person. But also understand that like all politics is local, and who you elect as your school board president matters a great deal. Who you elect as your mayor, your council members, your state representatives, your governor, they matter. A lot of times we get caught up in the presidential races, right? Because they're so hyper polarized. But we look at that, and people that are apathetic to electoral politics might say, well, politics don't matter to me. Electorate doesn't matter, voting doesn't matter. And I get that. But if there's any truth to that, it's not. It only would be even if there's any truth to that, it only is related to, I would say, those high level presidential elections, right? Where
Yeah.
you don't feel the change. You don't feel the change necessarily from Biden to Trump, or from whoever, whatever, Obama to whoever. But who you elect as your district attorney or your judge, that has the power to incarcerate, or the mayor who has the power to appoint your police commissioner and appoint your wardens or your folks that run the jail facilities, right? Those positions really, really matter. Who you elect in those positions can dictate your individual life. So it's really important to pay attention to those things.
Yeah, so many good points. So first of all, I do work for the U.S. Department of Education as a subject matter expert, and was down in a prison down in West Virginia. And this is in relation to Erica. Erica made a comment about a documentary that she saw about programming and gardening and packing deli meats being shipped out of the stores for incarceration, and they didn't get any of those foods that the company owning the prison, and they eliminated all the seasonings for, and it was really a cost-cutting thing. It's really interesting that I went down, and inside of this one prison in West Virginia, the women were in a culinary program, and I asked all the women in the program, I was like, are you and they served a great meal. It was right around Thanksgiving, and I asked them, did you, are you, when you get out, are you going to be working in a kitchen? You want to work in a restaurant? Well, not a single hand went up. Not one of them wanted to work when they got out there. But super interesting. And then we talked about the food service and the kinds of food, but there is a big problem with people that have food allergies. I know so many people that are allergic to certain things, whether it's milk or you name it, spices, um, and I don't, or have specialized diets. How about people that come in on diet, that are diabetics, or people that come in with, different stomach ailments or allergies, and the whole gambit of things. In your experience, is there anything that's being done for those people that have or need special diets and have special dietary needs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's honestly something that I need to brush myself up more on. I know that one of the issues that we're working on is a medical copay because a lot of folks that are incarcerated, like you said, you come into to prison with an ailment or you develop an ailment during your incarceration. Um, but yeah, I mean, there are certain accommodations that, like, if a person comes into a facility with a messed up knee and he has a cane, that cane is contraband, so they're going to take it, and you're just going to have to limp around, right? And you're going to have to go through a lot of bureaucracy and red tape to try and get another cane, and most of the time you don't, right? And so that's across. I mean, like even with women's monthly cycles and some of the women's blocks, we've seen issues with the healthcare related to that, right? With not being able to get the things that they need, right? And so like there's a lot of things tend to move slowly inside facilities, inside the prisons, but yeah, I
Very
mean,
almost backwards.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so it's definitely lacking. There's a lot to be desired.
So in the facility that I was at, they had a project. So this was the project. The project was they were going to build a hydroponic plant. So they took the basketball court and they got it from an old facility and they actually made a hydroponic plant. And they wanted everyone to get trained on the hydroponic, to work in this hydroponic lab and to grow fruits and vegetables. And no one wanted to do it. No one wanted to do it because they knew that, it was going to be hard work and they had whatever. But they came to me and they asked me because I had been doing some teaching inside. They said, well, will you teach a hydroponic class? Now, I'm from the Philadelphia. I inside the city. I don't even know what a hydroponic plant was. I didn't know anything about it. And I asked them, I said, I'll do it under one condition is that I can find somebody that knows about how to grow fruits and vegetables in the unit and let them teach that part of it. And I'll teach them the business startup part. Like, how do you run the business when you get out? That kind of thing. And we
Yeah.
kind of blended the two of them together. We talk about, being understanding food and the culture of food. Part of it is understanding that we have the ability really to, many facilities do, to have their own plants where they can raise certain crops, where they can actually have an active farm where they can make fruits and produce, and yet that often fails to flow down to the inmates, and the residents. It really is something that's sold or discarded, but doesn't flow down into the system. And I'm just trying to understand how that could possibly be. And does that make any sense to you?
No, I mean it really doesn't. It doesn't make any sense at all, and it's sad. But it again, it speaks again to the notion, which really is an overarching theme for any conversations that you want to have about prison conditions and criminal justice, the criminal legal system in America, which is that again, if you commit a crime, if you're incarcerated, you belong there, but you're automatically eliminated from being treated with dignity and fairness. And I think that's the fight. I think that is the notion, that is the narrative that we have to change. Because if we change that narrative, if we start training COs and staff differently on how to, work with inmates and those kinds of things. But if the wardens are trained with a different mentality, right? It would just take a complete revamp of the criminal legal system in America.
So interesting. And part of that revamp is a culture change. And by the way, thanks, Anne, for talking about Madison. She talked about Madison Correctional Institute in Florida, where they have a culinary institute. It's a culture change. I wonder if we could get every prison to just place one order for food and the correctional officers and staff eat the same food that the inmates get, if that's a good first step to getting, you know, I call food parity, like getting people to understand that food's important. It's important to the COs, it's important to the admin that are on, and important to the people coming home. But it is a hard sell, and I know that there's a few comments in there about how we could get people to think differently about it as advocates when they come home, and trying to get them, how do you make that argument? And I do think it's a humanity issue. Like it's an
Oh yeah.
it's a humanity issue kind of thing. So I wonder, like, do we need to have a dedicated program or advocacy campaign nationally? Is that what this is going to take?
I think that's going to be a big part of it, right? Because we have to figure out a way to get the message out to a lot of people, and it's going to take a grassroots. It's going to be a grassroots strategy. I mean, I think there's a legislative strategy, certainly an organizing strategy on multiple levels. But I mean, I think that it is about mostly about messaging. It's mostly about changing hearts and minds, and what I like to call winning the war of ideas, right? Because right now, everybody thinks the same about it. It's like, oh, they're incarcerated. You kind of forget about them, right? Which is literally why the prison society was started, so that we won't forget about folks just because they're incarcerated. And so the folks on the inside, Department of Corrections, the powers that be, the COs, whoever, they know that most of the folks in there are forgotten about. They're forgotten
So
about.
So Anne made a really good point. Anne, thank you. She's one of our Petey Greene volunteer tutors. So thanks, Anne, for helping us out and helping get our students smarter. And she's been doing this for a while in New Jersey. And she's right. The system is really resistant to change. And I think of it as, in the work that we do, is like eating an elephant. Like you do it one bite at a time. It's very slow. It's methodical. But in the meantime, people are really being harmed by all of this, and they're going through, and I'm curious, and I'll be honest with you, I've been in this job for a little over a year. And one of the reasons why I took this job, not only because we were getting people smarter, and quite frankly, because of you, because we're changing culture. It starts with our young people and our volunteers and getting them to see the world differently. So I'm grateful that you've had this experience. But I guess the question I have for you, Leigh, and you work in this spaces, how in a system where they're so resistant to change, how can you what can you do to move the needle forward faster?
Yeah, so the thing about faster, it's change comes slow. I mean, think about, you know, 30 years ago when people were getting arrested for marijuana like crazy, and now you get to go to drive-in marijuana dispensaries, okay?
Mm.
So that took a while. You know what I'm saying? And so like it's gonna take some time for us to get to that point. But think about marijuana activists and how they chipped away at it. I mean, think about the LGBTQ community and how far they've come, and just the spirit of being able to be forward and front facing, about who you love. I mean, that took decades to happen,
Mm.
right? And so this is the same. It's just going to take time, but we have to make the conscious effort to move the needle on it. And the more we do it, the more angles we chip away at it at, the quicker it'll happen.
I want to spend just a few seconds to talk about what happens when you come home. So I know your study may not have touched on all this, but food coming home is like it's like foreign. It's like it's like you're going to a foreign country and you're beginning to see things again. I have this passion and infinity for sweets and for ice cream in particular. And
Same.
I remember coming home, I didn't eat ice cream in the entire time I was away, and coming home and eating ice cream, it was the most remarkable experience. It was like when you don't eat things for so long. And I guess a part of it is I was so trained on not eating some things and staying away from them that it took me a really long time before I even ate a piece of meat. Like I was afraid. I didn't want to eat when I came home. And somebody asked me, well, what was it that you craved the most when you came home? And honestly, food just didn't appeal to me anymore. And it was one of those traumas that I think I've finally gotten over a little bit, but my love for food just went so into the toilet when I was away. It took me a long time when I came home to kind of get that passion back that I had and my taste buds to a place where it was more than tuna or noodles or peanut butter and jelly were my big friends while I was away. That was kind of my life. And it's interesting that as people come home, imagine if we could teach people how to eat better while they're away. And when you come home, you can bring that to your families and you can educate them that, this is good for me. And look, and it's crazy too, because this when you're incarcerated, so many people are lifting weights and working
Yeah,
out. I mean, I
yeah.
was running 10 miles on the track every day. Like I was getting dizzy, but I was running and I felt like Forrest Gump a little bit on one track. But the truth is that when you're away, you stay physically fit and you want to get your body in good shape and your mind, you're reading, you're doing things. I don't think we think enough about that nutrition piece of it and what happens when you come home. The consequence of all of that is, you're really starting over all again. Um, but I'm curious, I know you didn't do a long bid, but was there anything that you craved on the inside that you're like when you got out, it was like your first food?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so first of all, when I first came home, that within a few weeks, I did a full body cleanse. Um, but one of the things I was craving was fried chicken. I think
Oh,
it had been my first meal. I don't remember. But I craved fried chicken. Um, and I may have, was it ice cream? It may have been ice cream for me too, but I did crave sweets. Because that's something like even like the junk food that they have in the commissary, it's not a decent selection of sweets, right? And so like definitely fried chicken was one of my first meals. It was something I had to have when I came home. But yeah, like just like better desserts.
yeah. So where I was, one of the things that they did was steal chicken. And they needed to find a way to keep it cold. And I was in a facility that was in the mountains and they would keep it outside, like of our unit. They'd leave and they'd pull it up from whatever, but they'd keep it outside. And I remember they had a snowstorm once and they were started snow plowing or using a snow blower on the sidewalks. And all of a sudden you heard this like really loud bang and things, and then all of a sudden you saw chicken pieces like flying everywhere. They buried the chicken outside in the snow, and the guys using the snow blowers like just went right over it. And yeah, they weren't not the smartest men, I guess. Some of them. Um, just crazy experiences. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I'm curious. And I wonder if you could tell us, we have a lot of people on the call. If they want to get information about the Pennsylvania Prison Society and the work you do, how can they get involved?
Yes. So we recently have been doing like small incremental revamps to our website. So it currently is in a really great spot. It looks great. So go to prisonsociety.org, sign up to be a volunteer. If you're in college, sign up to be a volunteer. But I want to say we don't do undergrads, I don't think, unfortunately. I think you have to be in graduate school. But certainly, if you're in graduate school, reach out. We do have internship opportunities, but we're always looking for new volunteers. We're always looking for like board members if you're sort of at that particular level. But yeah, no, we are very community driven and oriented organization. And we love meeting new people. So
I love
certainly,
it.
uh,
So I'm going to give you my pieces of advice. So I do some work, as I said, with the Department of Education. One of the projects I've been working on is what they call an integrated education training, and it's an IET. So I know we have some people on the field that are in education and that work in the space. An IET is something that can be explained this way. It's where a math teacher is teaching fractions in or near a classroom where a carpentry teacher is teaching carpentry. And it's contextualized learning and then put some career preparedness on top of it. And it's recognized in our WIOA laws. And we've spent the last 3 years I've been working on this project actually putting IETs inside of facilities, inside of correctional facilities. They're on the outside already in many places, but we're building them inside. And it really makes good sense, for example, especially in the culinary field, because what ends up happening in our kitchens is we often, as we're cooking, we have to know how many cups we should put in. And well, a third of a cup, what does that equal to? And two-thirds of a cup, and what does that look like? And really understanding fractions is a really big thing. And we're training people in our prisons and jails, and we're giving them the skills that they need, but we're not giving them the education that they need, the academic support they need to really be successful. So my advice for those that are coming on, that are on the call, that want to do some work in this space and really want to increase the really the breadth and scope of what we could do to help our students inside that are maybe working in culinary programs, is really seeing about an IET. And if you go onto the United States Department of Education has a website called links, lincs .ed.gov. If you go onto that website, you can see there's a correctional and reentry community of practice on there. And there's also a ton of resources. There's an entire toolkit dedicated to showing people how to get one of these programs off the ground. And it's the IET and Corrections Toolkit. And join the community of practice. You can ask questions. You could participate in events that are coming up. And the other thing is reach out to the Petey Greene program. Look, the ultimate goal of our injustice system is to get people prepared for what's next. 95% plus of those people behind the walls are coming home. It's not rocket science that if we do nothing, what's going to happen? So I encourage everyone that's listening today to step up, to get involved, to find those organizations that are doing good work, like the Pennsylvania Prison Society, and reach out to them. And if you have a question, dig deep and say, how can we help? What can we do? And if you're not in Pennsylvania, what can we do in Boston? I got some friends from Boston on today. What can we do in New York? What can we do in New Jersey? What can we do around the country? So you want to ask questions. There's a great line that Walt Whitman had said. He said, we should all be curious and not judgmental. And we should ask questions, and ask questions of our students. If you're working in the correctional education space, or if you're behind the walls and you're an instructor or an administrator, talk to your students. Ask them, what is it that, what are you comfortable eating? What is it that you'd like to see on the menu? Ask those questions to the people that are eating the food, so they can get a better understanding of maybe how we can chip away and change the system. We are the Petey Greene Program, and I'm so proud of the work that we do inside of the walls, getting people smarter. But it's not just about education. There are things like nutrition, which play a vital role in looking at incarceration in a holistic way to really stop this revolving prison door and jail doors that we have across the country. I want to give special thanks to our guests today, and Leigh Owens. Thank you for taking time with us today. Parting words. Like, I'm giving you I always keep a magic wand on my desk. I have one here today. I'm going to give it to you, because if you had an ask of all the people that are on the call, what is it that you'd like to see them do?
Ooh, that's a great question. Yeah, call your call your legislators, find out if they've ever visited a prison. Encourage them to visit a facility. Encourage them to see what goes on behind those walls. I mean, that's a big part of what we do, is we take legislators to prison so they can see what goes on, right? If you have family members, friends that are incarcerated, stay connected to them. Let them call you sometime to tell you how things are going. If you know someone that has been incarcerated, support them in their journey. But I think more than anything, just being engaged and staying connected, being on webinars like this and getting all the information is just vital, and then talking to your friends and your family members as well about these kinds of things and trying to change their minds and their opinions as well. It really does go a long way. It's literally how I live my life, having one conversation at a time. And
I
they ask.
love it. Really great stuff. Thank you so much. You know, I'm a big fan. So the Pennsylvania Prison Society not only does this and not only advocates in things like nutrition, but they're actually out there and they're talking about things like the way we're treating the medical conditions that the medical care that we're getting inside our prisons and jails, the conditions that people are living in. So thank you so much for all that you do. And it was a pleasure having you on. It was a great discussion. I want to remind everybody that we do have this gigantic 5K that's coming up, and it's really simple. It's April 13th. It's going to be in Philadelphia at the Naval Shipyard. If you're in Philadelphia, and it'll also be in Boston and in Princeton, New Jersey. If you want to get out and get healthy and stay fit, take a walk with us. Bring your dogs out, bring your family out. It's just a fun day of people taking a long walk or a quick run, either one. And we did put the in the chat box the registration link so you can get on in there. I want to give a shout out to Sarah Hirschhorn for putting this all together for us and all of our guests that are on here. Look, I'm going to be honest, the going through the system of incarceration, you learn many, many things, and you learn about all the injustices and the challenges that our systems face. But they only change when we want them to, and they only change when we do something about it. I encourage all of you to spend a few minutes to do the little things that you can. Volunteer somewhere, give somebody a hand when they come home, and you could even just shake a hand and say welcome home or give them a smile. You'd be amazed at how far that gets when you come home to give you that little nudge to get back on your feet. And we appreciate all of our family, that Petey Greene family. I want to give a shout out to all my staff, all of our wonderful volunteers and tutors that are out there that are just changing the way we look at things today. And you guys are all amazing. You're doing great work, and Petey Greene's rocking and rolling across the country right now. So we are excited about what the future holds. If you want to get involved, check us out at www.petygreene.org, and we'd be glad to have you as part of our family. Just let us know what your interests are. How can you help us, and how can we help you? And we can get it all together. So I wanted to thank everybody again for joining us. We're right at 7:30, real conscious of time. The Petey Greene Program, it's a great place for everybody. I want to give a big shout out to everybody that's on today. So thank you so much, and special thanks to Leigh Owens. It's great having you, Leigh. Take care, bud.
To be here. Thank you.